A month ago, when Jody asked if I would consider giving a homily, I had to look up in the dictionary what a homily was. Sermon, message. No, that's not how it happened. When your interim minister told me I would be giving a homily this morning, a sermon, a message, I immediately resisted. I said, I have no credibility. Don't you remember the time I got up here and I let them know that at the age of 10 I set my parents' garage on fire? I have no credibility. None. And here I am, for the only reason that I always listen to my pastor. My message today, and I don't make an apology for this, but my message today is in part largely autobiographical. And I hope you find something in it that convinces you of the no-matter-whatness of God's welcome. When I was in junior high, our next-door neighbors in Holland, a couple my father's and mother's age, in their 40s, I guess, hosted for a week through their church an African-American boy from the housing projects on Chicago's South Side. All right, that's the setting. Our neighbor, the husband, invited me to come over to meet this boy. His name was Jamal. And he thought we would make good playmates for a day or two. So he invited me over, and with several minutes, oddly enough, he encouraged us, actually he told us, to wrestle each other on the floor of the living room carpet. So we did. And I was woefully outmatched, outmaneuvered, outskilled. Jamal knew all the right moves. He had me pinned in seconds, and his knuckle was sort of screwing into my temple. And I remember with absolute clarity, my neighbor got down on his hands and knees, inches from my face, and he said, "Come on, Danny, don't let that darky beat you." Jamal stood up, hands on his hips. He says, "My name's not Darky, it's Jamal. And we don't have to fight each other because we're already friends." So Solomon prayed. Prayed to God to bless the ger, the immigrant, the outsider, the outcast, the other, the one who speaks in halting English, the gay who's afraid to come out, the trans, the queer, the shamed, the one who doesn't fit in, the light-skinned, most of you, the dark-skinned, the one last picked, the one least likely to be loved, Jamal from the housing projects, so that all the people of the earth might know the no-matter-whatness of God's welcome. When I was in college, Calvin, I worked part-time at Bethany Christian Services. I helped manage an in-resident group home for adolescent boys, 8, 9, 10 years old, who were in need of foster care parents. They were in a tough place, as you can imagine. Babies are a whole lot easier to place. Some of the boys had already been in 2, 3, one was even in 4 foster care homes by the time they landed in the cottage I was working at. One night, when I was the counselor on duty, that meant I had to stay up all night and just make sure things were okay. A particularly scrappy kid named Wayne started on a rampage throughout the cottage, and he was swinging his fists and slamming his feet against chairs, and I couldn't talk him down, I couldn't calm him down, so I tackled him. And we both fell to the floor together, and I was on my back, and I had my arms around him, and his back was pressed against my chest, and I kept saying, "Wayne, you're a good kid. You're a good kid. You're a good kid." And he fell asleep. His back against my chest, my arms around him. An hour and a half later, he woke up. "Mr. Dan, Mr. Dan." "Yeah, Wayne. I think you hugged the hurt out of me." So Solomon prayed for God to bless the ger, the immigrant, the outsider, the outcast, the other, the migrant, the one who speaks in halting English, the gay kid who's afraid to come out, the trans, the queer, the shame, the one who doesn't fit in, the light skin, the dark skin, the last one picked, the one least likely to be loved. Wayne in search of a foster home, so that all the people of the earth might know the no-matter-whatness of God. My first church assignment when I was a student at New Brunswick Theological Seminary in New Jersey was a stint, a year-long weekend stint in Brooklyn, New York. By the way, Brooklyn is a long way from Holland, Michigan. I served a church with a unique and frankly the longest title I'd ever known, the Reformed Protestant Dutch Church of Flatbush, known by the community as the Flatbush Reformed Church. Now, every Sunday I walk by your timeline, and you have a magnificent history. It goes back, to 1882? The charter of the Reformed Protestant Dutch Church of Brooklyn goes back to 1654. In the early 1700s, 1 in 3 people in New York City was a slave. The church had a cemetery, a 2-acre cemetery. Slaves of members were not allowed to be buried on church property. They had to go to the city lot. Slaves could attend worship, but they had to sit in the balcony. Now, when I was there, the church was, it was failing in its, or not, well, it was not as large as it once had been, but it was still quite substantial and distinguished, and many, I think, well-to-do people were still members there. Madeline introduced herself to me on one Sunday. "Daniel, I am a lifelong member of the Mayflower Society, and my lineage goes far back to the descendant who was aboard the Mayflower and landed at Pilgrim Rock in 1620. Now, Daniel, tell me something about your lineage and your genes." "Well, Madeline, my dad never graduated from high school, and he was raised on a pig farm in a spit of a town called Grascup. And as far as my genes, I much prefer Levi's." We actually became quite close. But it was a black couple of Caribbean descent, whose great-great-grandparents were slaves on what is today Haiti and the Dominican Republic, who took me in those weekends, who fed me, who gave me a place to sleep in their low-income fourth-floor walk-up apartment, who encouraged me, who hugged me and hugged me some more and hugged me even more than that, who loved me and prayed over me and pretty much saved my soul. So Solomon prayed for God to bless the Ger, the immigrant, the outsider, the outcast, the other, the migrant, the one who speaks in halting English, the gay who's afraid to come out, the trans, the queer, the shamed, the one who doesn't fit in. The light skin, the dark skin, the last one picked, the one least likely to be loved, the black couple of Caribbean descent, so that all the people of the earth might know the no-matter-whatness of God's love. 15 years later, in the 1980s, 1986, I think precisely, I was serving another Reformed church in America, this time in Rochester, New York, upstate New York. I became close friends with a Roman Catholic priest, Father James Callan, C-A-L-L-A-N. Father Callan served the Corpus Christi Roman Catholic Church. It was just 4 blocks from our church. He grew it to about 400 members. Father Jim was a real progressive priest. I think Sal would have loved him. Father Jim was also a thorn in the bishop's butt. Yeah, I think Sal would have loved him. Father Jim opened up key leadership positions in his church to women. Now, this is a Roman Catholic church now. In the 80s, he regularly allowed women to preach from the Catholic pulpit, celebrate Mass with him. And by the way, the bishop was not happy. I suggested to Father Jim that his congregation and mine should get together some Sunday for worship service. So we did. On Worldwide Communion Sunday, the first Sunday in October, his congregation walked the 3 or 4 blocks to First Reformed Church in Rochester. We had probably 10 times as many people in our church than what are here today. Father Jim preached from a Protestant pulpit. We sang out of the Protestant hymnal. Father Jim read from the liturgy of the Reformed Church in America for Communion Sunday. And we celebrated the elements of the bread and the juice. It was a grand old time, and the bishop was not happy. We partnered on several community projects, like a hospice home called Isaiah House, where indigenous people could come to die with dignity. We had a ministry of skill training for men who just got out of prison. And about a year and a half later, we gathered again for worship, this time at Father Jim's parish, the Corpus Christi Roman Catholic Church. I preached from the Catholic pulpit, and I can tell you it was 3 times as big as this pulpit. I read from the liturgy of the Mass. When it was time for what I call communion, Father Jim insisted that I hold up the bread. Now, those of you with Catholic background know the sacredness of the bread. You don't want to drop the bread, which is the body of Christ, right? He insisted that I hold this up, and I did. And we served Protestants and Catholics at that Mass, and no one was turned away. No one was denied, and the bishop wasn't happy. 10 years later, I moved on to another church. I found out with the approval of the Pope in Rome, Father James Callan, who exalted the role of women and blessed same-sex marriages and had no problems with Protestants like me, was removed and eventually excommunicated. Finally, the bishop was happy. Father James Callan went on to start another Roman Catholic church, not affiliated with a church in Rome, but it was still a Catholic church called Spiritus Christi. You can Google it for yourselves. I think it has about 600 members today. The first thing Father Jim did when he established that church, he made himself the associate priest, and he hired a black woman to be the senior priest. So Solomon prayed to God to bless the Ger, the immigrant, the outsider, the outcast, the other, the migrant, the one who speaks in halting English, the gay who's afraid to come out, the trans, the queer, the shame, the one who doesn't fit in, light skin, the dark skinned, the last one picked, the one least likely to be loved, priests who take unnecessary risks for God, so that all the people of the earth might know the no-matter-whatness of God's welcome. One more. For 15 years, I served an RCA congregation in the western suburbs of Chicago. It's where my 3 kids grew up. It was the era of the 1990s. Rush Limbaugh was spewing forth his diatribes on talk radio. The religious right was gaining momentum. You know, it's funny, those sound like the good old days to me, actually, compared to, yeah. Around 1996, I received a letter from 20 church members of my congregation. They wanted, it actually began, our hearts are troubled. We seek to know your position on a number of biblical matters. That's never good news when you get a letter like that. They wanted to know that their letter had been, how did they put it, bathed in deep prayer. They presented their concerns with 6 questions, seeking my written answers. Is it okay if I share those questions with you? Is it? Do we have to take a vote on that? Is it? Number 1, is the Bible God's inspired word dictated to the writers so that all God intends is found there? 2, do you believe that the Bible is inerrant, that is, without errors, perfect in all it says? 3, can a good Buddhist get to heaven? 4, is hell a real place? And will some people end up there? I don't dare to look at anyone too long because you're going to think okay. 5, does the Bible teach that homosexuality is a sin? 6, can same-sex relationships, even loving ones, ever be condoned? I have a confession. In 30-plus years of ministry and oftentimes dealing with ornery, cantankerous, tightly wound people, there was a time in my ministry when I had 2 really close, dear friends. One friend's name was Bud. Budweiser. And the colder Bud was, the better Bud was. And sometimes when I got sick of Bud and kicked him out of the house, I had another friend, and this friend was far more sophisticated and smooth and very European, actually. It's Johnny. Johnny Walker. You know him too? Yeah. Jody will testify that very rarely do I drink either one anymore. I don't abstain entirely, but I know when toxic friendships need to be cut off. But I digress. Back to the questions. My answers failed to satisfy. Surprise, surprise. In fact, I think I sealed my fate in my response to the question, can a good Buddhist get to heaven? I said truthfully, yes, I believe a good Buddhist can get to heaven. And then I had to add, I think even a bad Buddhist can get there. You know? In the next 3 months, all 20 people and their children, many of whom I baptized, left for more suitable places of worship. Honestly, it still stings a little bit. But here's all I know. The more we love and respect and work for the well-being and the welfare of those unlike us, the closer we come to the heart of God. And I'll stake my life, as I'm pretty sure you will too, on the no-matter-whatness of God's welcome. May you find a few ways this week to put that welcome into practice. I invite you to take a moment to reflect on what you've heard. Thank you.